Hello, and what I want to do today is talk about Unit 9 evolution, and this is going to be 9A on fossils, and you can see some of the animations or some of the pictures I'm going to show you. I'm trying to actually get the slideshow to begin here, but I'm using my netbook and it seems to be taking some issues. Okay, so here we go. What I want to do first is show this relatively simple clockwise representation of geologic history of the Earth, where we think that the Earth actually started 4.6 billion, or up what it says up there, 4,600 million years ago, moves in a clockwise direction. For about the first, let's say 2 hours on this picture, we got meteorite bombardment, which is how the Earth actually created more mass, got larger, and actually picked up its water, probably some of the materials that are eventually going to become life as well. If you look over on this one, we can see this is a 24-hour clock. So the first 3 hours meteor bombardment. Very tough to get life to form. We probably started getting oceans. We got continental rocks starting to form. Of course, it was still too warm, so the continental rock actually melted. That cooled the rest of the Earth. If we imagine this as being the Earth for a second. Then the crust actually lasted longer and longer and longer until eventually it stood in place. We had water vapor being put up into the air. It condensed as it cooled and rained back down. Some of that hit that hot rock and evaporated right back up, but it cooled the rock even more. The next drop lasted a little longer, and eventually we started getting little streams, little puddles, then creeks, and then lakes, and then eventually started filling up the low areas. And as you'll see in a little while, that was a pretty large percentage of the Earth's surface. Somewhere around 4 o'clock on a 24-hour clock, or somewhere around 2:30 on this clock, we actually got the origin of life. Now, we don't have any record of the origin of life because that rock is too old and it weathered and eroded just like rock does today, and it got the fossils didn't really form. Somewhere around 5 o'clock or 5:30, we got the oldest fossils forming, and then right around 6 in the morning till around looks like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we have abundant banded iron formations. And what we did here is we actually started getting these microorganisms produced oxygen, put oxygen up into the atmosphere, and it actually oxidized the iron oxides, producing iron oxide or rust. We got banded iron formations, reds with darks. And then somewhere right around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, around 7, if this is this 12-hour clock, we got single cell algae. We have sexual reproduction right around 6, and then we start getting this big blossom of life all the way across. I do want to point out that these are the 3 main areas of the Earth, starting from 4.6 billion or 300,600 million years ago, all the way over here to 544 million years ago, is what's called the Precambrian. It made up 87% of the Earth's history. It's made up of the Archean and the Proterozoic periods, but basically we have very little life. We have the formation of the Earth, formation of the oceans, then we move all the way over here and we start getting some life, and we start getting fossil life, and then we start getting oxygen, and then we start getting an atmosphere, and then right here what we did is we got a blossom of life. And the reason this is called Precambrian is the first period here in the Paleozoic is called the Cambrian period. And we'll talk about those in a couple seconds. So here's another rendition of Earth's time. Crust forms right around, actually I disagree with that. I think crust forms probably over here somewhere. Then we have the inferred original life, where we think life actually started to form. We have the oldest rocks preserved on the planet. This is the reason why we don't get any life forming in the rocks, is because we don't have any rocks that are that old. First fossil evidence soon after the first rock was created. First bacteria, first cells with a nucleus, so the eukaryotic cells actually form out here, which is what we're talking about down here. First multicelled organisms soon after that, jellyfish, which you can see right there. Over here on this 12 o'clock clock, puts jellyfish. What are you doing there, you old word Harold? Puts jellyfish. You can follow this line up. Puts jellyfish about right there, and then we have a big blossoming of continuation of the evolution of life. And notice as you move up this chart, we get more and more complicated. It's not like we find dinosaurs way down here with the creation of first fish, or the first land plants, or the first amphibians, or even the first reptiles. We find them up there, and then we get birds after that, and we get mammals in between, and we get a mass extinction. This is going to be the KT period between the Mesozoic ending and the Cenozoic beginning, and we don't get first human life until, you can see, less than 2 minutes before this on this 24-hour clock, or actually even way less than a minute. Looks like a tenth of like 6 seconds before 12 o'clock on this clock. So man has not been here. And just think about all the good things we've been able to do and how much we've really messed up. From oldest to most recent, the 4 eras. We have the Precambrian, which again makes up 87% of the known Earth history. We have the Paleozoic. Nice way to think about the Paleozoic is what kind of life can you get to grow into a pail full of water. This is the age of the fishes, or the age of the aquatic and marine organisms. Then around 244 million years ago, we have what's called the Mesozoic, or the age of the dinosaurs. And that lasted all the way to 65 million years, where we got the Cenozoic. And the reason we have these barriers between the Precambrian and the Paleozoic is because life blossomed. It just like it boomed right here. Tremendous amount of life, but living mostly in an ocean, and you'll see why in a few minutes. Here we have a mass extinction, where about 90% of the known fossils that were found didn't make it across this line. And then we have this other line right here, the KT boundary, where about 70% of the organisms that lived in the Mesozoic, the age of the dinosaurs, didn't make it into the Cenozoic, the age of the mammal. So what's going to happen? How are we going to know the end of this one? Well, this area will keep getting wider and wider. These walls will get smaller and smaller as we fit on this 24-hour clock. But what's going to happen to the end of the Cenozoic is basically the mammals have to disappear. I'm not sure what kind of event that's going to be, but when that does happen, who's going to be taking over? It'll be the age of the who. Great, we're going backward in time. These four encompass the 4.6 billion years of the 4,600 million year Earth history. Here's another way of looking at it. If you take a look at this one, this black line actually shows you where the average temperature is. And you can see it's been a lot warmer, and it's been a lot colder in places. We have glaciation, but you can actually see the land masses, and there's the amphibians. We have the Paleozoic, the Proterozoic, the Archean, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic. We have the really old, sort of old, life in a pail. We have the dinosaur life, and we have the mammal life. If you take a look at the picture, this is the way the Earth looks today. You go all the way back in here to the Archean, and you can see why the life actually maybe lived in the ocean and lived pretty much worldwide. Is because the ocean covered 90% of the planet. We have an accretion. We actually have an enlarging of continents as they run around and push up oceanic crust. Volcanism, earthquakes, tectonic action. Then we actually have them colliding into Pangaea over here in the Permian period. It's like right there. And this is where we actually had critters very easily able to walk between, looks like the Atlantic Ocean, because the land masses were right next to each other. Okay, this is a picture of geologic time again. You can see we're starting with the Cenozoic, and way up here we have the humans. The first thing that actually happened in the Cenozoic, we had grasslands, and then we had primitive humans, and then we have the extinction of many of the large mammals. If you remember, we had sloths larger than the elephants today, and saber-toothed tigers that were 24 feet long. And then we have animals, and then we have modern plants, then we have humans. So each of these actually start listing the most primitive in the area of the Cenozoic. This is actually talking about the epochs. So we do have eras, which are made up of periods, which are made up of epochs, and these things actually have names. The Eocene are what are actually in the Cenozoic. Down here we have Cretaceous, Jurassic, and Triassic. We don't really have epochs, but we can see the ages here. And the question about reading these charts is, lily of the valley is a flowering plant. when is the earliest this plant could have evolved. And if you look down through here, we have very earliest flowering plants. I'm thinking it probably is down there, except this is a little bit more evolved than that one. So we're going to put flowering plants here in the middle, and we would say that's around 165 million years ago, because this is now in years, so that number is very, very, very large, lots of zeros. Then we go down to the Paleozoic, because we actually had the Mesozoic up there, and we have the Permian and the Carboniferous and the Devonian and Silurian and Ordovician, and then we have the Cambrian, which actually is again the Precambrian comes before the Cambrian. And you can see in the Cambrian we have protists and sponges and jellyfish and spore-producing plants, and these things get more evolved as we go up. And again, it sort of looks like evolution because we didn't have man way down here. But the question here is, when is the first organisms on the Earth according to this table? Looks like they're going to be down in here. Monera is actually a very primitive. Protists are a little bit more complicated. Fungi more complicated, and invertebrates even more complicated. So here they actually have the most ancient right there, and that's going to be probably really late, not at the beginning of the Precambrian, but right at the end. Here's a two-page document that I shrunk down. It's actually a very marvelous look at the Earth's history. It's actually from the perspective of New York State, because this is for the New York regions. It actually is page 8 and page 9 of the Earth Science reference tables. This is a 2001 edition. They do have a 10 and an 11 edition, which I probably should have put in here. But what this really does, it's starting way over here. We actually have the eons. So you can see we have the Phanerozoic and we have the Precambrian. That's made up of the Archean and the Proterozoic. And then we have the eras, which are the Cenozoic, the most recent, the Mesozoic, and the Paleozoic, and then the Precambrian, which is way down here. Notice that they've shrunk the Precambrian, which again is 87% of the Earth's history, into a much smaller unit. Then we have periods, and you can see Quaternary, and you can see Cenozoic, and you can see Permian, and you can see all the way down here the Cambrian. Lots of different periods. And the epochs, the ones down here in the Cenozoic have names. When we get down into the other ones, we just call them early, and then middle and late. The Cretaceous, for some reason, doesn't have the middle. Jurassic, Triassic, and all the rest. There's another early and late, and another one, and then there's a middle, and there's an early and late, and there's a middle, and there's a middle. And then we have life, which is, I know it's kind of tough to see, but if you actually type in Earth Science reference table, geologic history, you can find one of these that are so big, even on a very large 26-inch screen, you'll be scrolling back and forth to see it. But this actually describes the life that actually forms in these particular epochs, or in this case, in particular periods, because it doesn't really have the breakdown for the epochs. Then we have rock record, and you can see New York's got some rock that's that old, and it's got some rock that's that old, and it's got some rock that's that old, and all the way down through there. And I think actually what we do is, well, I'm not sure how we can find some of these fossils, but they're there. Time distribution of fossils. This actually has all the letters that are up here. One of my favorites are the trilobites, and the trilobites were located way down here when the ocean was a very large portion of the surface. They're called index fossils because they were found just about everywhere, and they didn't last very long. This particular trilobite species lasted from there to there. So if you can find a rock that has that particular type of trilobite in it, you know that that rock is somewhere between the middle Cambrian all the way up to the middle Ordovician. So you can actually see the ages right here in terms of millions of years. So this number is 544 rather than 544 million. But you can see that for all these critters, and it doesn't go up to very advanced humans like maybe us, but it does actually go to mammoth, and it does go to the beluga whale, which is the O, and the O looks like it's in this period right here, so that's the mammals, and mammals go all the way back to the Triassic, where we had very primitive mammals, and then we actually go all the way up to here where we find man. Then it has tectonic activity, talks about a passive margin as North America has moved away from Africa and South America. The active side is on the west coast. The east coast is very passive. So New York, and this is, you can cross this out and say almost any state on the east coast of the United States. I'm in Virginia, but we're still in the passive margin. We've been so since the beginning of the Cretaceous. And then we actually have a rifting area where we split apart from you can see right here where we split apart from Africa and South America. Rifting is pulling apart. And then we move all the way over here, and this is going to be transform collision, where we actually move side to side, where we slipped. And then we have continental collision, where we ran into things, and I went a little fast there. But we're pretty close to the end, and I'm not sure why it did that. Maybe because I clicked the end. Let's go back to play here. Let's see if we can get this. And then we can see we have other things way down here. And then the last part, geologic events in New York, and we can actually cross that out and say any state, because the Appalachians go from Georgia all the way up into Maine. These are much older mountain ranges, which you're going to find in other places. And you can see there are more mountain ranges down there, and even the Grenville orogeny. These are called orogenies. The auras means mountain, and Genesis for Genesee actually stands for creation. So these are creation of mountain ranges. And then the inferred position of the land masses in that last one, but I talked about that earlier. First life was more bacterial than anything else. They were prokaryotes. This was before we had a nucleus. The nucleus was not there, but the genetic material has to be there, which actually produces the proteins, which makes all critters, which means we have to have ribosomes, we have to have RNA and DNA. It has to have some way to pull food in and how to pull food out. It has its structure by the cell wall. It also has a cell membrane, and it has cytosol inside. It has flagella for moving. If it lives in an aquatic, which it probably did, environment. They were anaerobic, which means they didn't need oxygen to survive. They were also heterotrophic, which means they couldn't produce their own food. They had to find food in the environment in which they lived. This is cellular respiration, and this prokaryotic anaerobic, which doesn't use oxygen, is only able to do one of the three types of ATP production. ATP, as you remember, is the energy that makes cells do all the processes that they need to do. They need proteins to actually create themselves, but we need ATP to actually create the proteins. Because you don't have mitochondria in prokaryotic cells, these guys are 10 to 100 times smaller than the cells in your body. They're not big enough to actually have large things inside. And remember, we actually talk about mitochondria as being a prokaryotic cell that cells have actually brought in into themselves to actually help them produce ATPs. But if you actually are a prokaryotic anaerobic critter, all you can do is glycolysis, which produces 2 ATPs versus the 36 that your body can get from the 2 here and the 34 through Krebs cycle and electron transport happening inside the mitochondria. Then later we had photosynthetic bacteria. I don't know why I want to say photosynthetic bacteria, which actually added the oxygen to the Earth's atmosphere through a process called chemocytosis. Chemocytosis is not using light, it's using chemicals to produce energy, and that actually produced oxygen. And you can see right around 2.5, little after 2.5 billion years ago, or looks like about 2 billion years after the Earth formed, oxygen starts forming in the atmosphere, and then we got those banded iron formations, and it leveled off for some. Some of these places are very uncertain how much oxygen was in there, but it's someplace in this range. And then it picked up, and it now is right around 21% of the Earth's atmosphere. These are the red banded, or the red banded iron formations. We can see it actually in a mountain in the background, and you can see it in this particular rock, and I think you can make it out on this one very easily. You can see the oxidated iron inside the bands in these rocks, so we get banded iron formations. It is still a very good iron ore, but we somehow have to get the oxygen, because the way you make this oxidized rock is you add oxygen to iron, producing iron oxide. So it actually says that there was oxygen in the air at some point. If you get older rock than this, it just looks like iron. But once it actually gets exposed to the atmosphere, it forms these nice red bands. Relative dating. When we look at fossils, again, fossils are probably not made out of organic material. We're very lucky if we can find parts of the original organism, but normally what happens to make a fossil is you've got to actually get a critter to die, or you've got to get a critter to die in an environment which takes it out of the food chain as quickly as possible. If these were actually still on the surface after they're dead, other critters would have ripped them to pieces. But the fact that we can find whole organisms, what happened is there was a storm and lots of sedimentation that covered the animal right after it died, or it died because it got covered up, or landslides, or volcanic eruption, and we got lots of ash. You can't get the lava because that would have incinerated the life, but if you actually got a big ash flow, you can see they're actually dating the ashes in that picture. But if you got an ash flow, you could cover these guys very quickly. And then the body actually disintegrates. It leaves a shape inside similar or exactly like the critter that was there, and then minerals secrete into and solidify, precipitate inside the void, and take the shape of the organism. So most of the time we get fossils, they're made out of rock material and not so much living or dead living material. Relative dating. I talk about cinder block walls in my classroom, and it's really easy to see that the cinder blocks that are way down here at the bottom were put down before the cinder blocks way up here at the top, because you wouldn't be able to support them. So dating rocks with depth. The deeper you go, the older the rock is. So if you look at these shellfish and look at those trilobites, it's pretty easy to see these trilobites are a lot older than those shellfish. But the question is how much older? You really can't tell. And I use the expression in my classroom is that we look at the age of the people in my class. I'm the oldest one in the class. And then we have the next oldest. And then I usually ask who's the youngest in the class. And then we talk about the difference in age between the youngest and the next oldest, and the next oldest and the oldest me. And there's a lot more difference between me and the oldest child than there is between the oldest child and the youngest child in the classroom. But that's all relative dating. It's without using numbers. It just talks about using younger and older. Problems with this is time changes the rock, climate changes the rock, and plate tectonic changes the rock. All those would wear away rock, which disintegrates the fossils. Climate, either wearing it away faster or slower. Plate tectonics, bending, faulting, melting. All these things change it. Here's an example of one, and I'm going to actually just show you this. The rock erodes, it tilts, it faults, all due to stresses, and you can actually get molten blobs like this A that comes through. This A actually went through and it burned all the rock that used to be here. But if you look at this diagram, E is the oldest rock that's on here because it is the lowest. And then comes G, and then comes the first L. And I say the first L because there's another L up there, but it's really J. The first L, and then we have C, and then we have H, which is this break in the rock, and then we have tilting. Because you can see these rocks were originally horizontal. Rocks don't form like this. If they did, they would get washed down to the bottom of the valley, and you'd actually see this L layer flat down here. So rocks are originally put down horizontally, so if they are tilted, the tilting happened after the rock formed. And then we have erosion. If you take a look at the top of this, it looks like G's been taken away and a lot of C's been taken away in this area, but the actual surface is kind of zigzagged. That was done by water. Sedimentation usually happens underwater, and then erosion happens above water. So this was uplifted and eroded down to that point, and then it was put back down underwater because this is sandstone right around a beach. This is a lot more limestone, which happened way far down, deep inside of some clear, probably warm ocean. And then I don't know what that is. And then we have shale, so the water got a little shallower. And then I don't know if those are two sandstones, but got even more shallower. And then we have the formation of, like I said, M, D, and L. And then we have this igneous intrusion of A, which burns through E and G and L and C and M and D and L or J. And then we actually have it uplifted again, so it erodes. And then we have put down, subducted down, so we got N, and K and B, and then it all got tilted some more because this is tilted even more than this, and they're no longer horizontal because you can see K is gone, but not all of K. And then we had it uplifted and eroded, so we have this nice flat surface again. And it looks like we got all this rock eroded away. And then it went back down below water, and we got the formation of F. And then it went above water because now it's being eroded again. And we even put a stream in here, which could eventually end up looking like the Grand Canyon as it cuts through the older and older and older rock. But all we can really say is what's older and what's younger. We can't say by how much time. So it doesn't give the exact age, and that's a big problem with relative dating. Here's some things I show my earth science kids when I teach earth science. Law of superposition, youngest rock is always put on top. The law of original horizontality, if you see the rock not being horizontal, the stresses that made it not horizontal happened after the rock was made because the rock was put down horizontally. The law of lateral continuity, if you have the Grand Canyon and you can see one sandstone on one side and sandstone on the other side, even though they may be 10, 15 miles apart, they used to continue. The rock used to be there, it got taken away by whatever made that canyon. Cross-cutting relationships, anything that cuts across it is younger than the thing it cuts across. 1, 2, 3 was there before 4 cut across it. Looks like something eroded it away, and 5 is the youngest thing in that whole picture. Here's another block. You can see C is the oldest one, then B, and we actually have a fairly deep ocean, then even a deeper ocean to make the limestone from the shale. It changed. It may even show a little bit of erosion boundary there, just like it may have an erosion boundary there. But we basically have C and D, and then we have D. Then we have A, looks like a sandstone. Then we have D because it cuts across all that. And then we have erosion because part of A, which was put up, and we can actually tell this because this thing was pushed up and this one was actually allowed to go down. This is a tensional force. It's actually called a normal fault in earth science. But then we have the formation of this layer right here, and then we have the formation of E, which cuts across everything. So E is actually the youngest thing, except for maybe the streams or valleys that are eroding away this rock. But basically, in terms of the rock itself, E is the youngest thing in the picture. Continuity, Grand Canyon. If you go to the Grand Canyon, which goes back into rock that's more than 2 billion years old, actually it looks like it's more than, probably. Let's say it's at least older than 544 million because we have Precambrian rock, some of the oldest rock in the United States. And then we have Cambrian rock, and we have Mississippian and Pennsylvanian, which is Carboniferous rock, and we have Permian rock, and we even have some Triassic rock, age of the dinosaurs, Mesozoic rock. But the youngest rock that's in the Grand Canyon is the oldest rock that you can see in Zion Park. Here's Grand Canyon in northern Arizona, and there's Zion in very southern Utah. They're probably 150 miles apart, but the youngest rock in one is the oldest rock in the other. And if you go up, we can see we are in the Triassic, and we even get into the Jurassic in Zion. And then if you go to Bryce Canyon, which is about 70 miles away, you can actually find the oldest rock in Bryce Canyon is the youngest rock in Zion, and it goes all the way up. So what does that mean? It means this very youngest rock in Bryce Canyon used to be way up here on top of the Grand Canyon and has been weathered and eroded, traveling with the Colorado River out to, I think that goes into the Pacific Ocean. Actually doesn't go into anything anymore because the United States pretty much sucks it up even before it gets to Mexico. But all this rock used to be here, and what happened to it? It all got eroded away. This is Horseshoe Canyon, or Horseshoe Bend, right outside Page, Arizona, just a little bit south of Page, Arizona. And I've actually floated down this river. This is the Green River. Green River starts up in Wyoming, I think, and actually works all the way down to Colorado. But it is a beautiful river, and you can float on this one, and you can also drive out of Page, head south on the main drag, and you about a mile or two outside of, and I want to go back to that, about a mile or so outside of town, south of town, you can make it to this beautiful park, you actually park about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away, and you walk across it. It's a pretty tough walk. You walk up quite a distance, then you walk back down. It's tougher actually walking back from Horseshoe back up to your car than it is the other way, but it's beautiful, and you can stand right here and literally look down at this image. I did not take this one. This is a wide-angle picture. I do have a panoramic view, which I did not post, which actually is 3 pictures about this distance, but because of sun angles and shadows, they don't meld together very well. This is a very beautiful picture, high resolution picture, and look at all that vegetation right next to the water when there's almost none anywhere else. Shows you what water can do for life. If you ever watched the movie Jumpers, this has a very famous last scene. I think right here it actually says it's a cave, and the bad guy actually gets put right there, trying to keep him from coming back up, because he can't jump from space to place to place like the jumpers can, so he's pretty much stuck. The last thing we got to talk about is fossil dating. Fossil dating is looking at radioactive material. It's also called radiometric dating. The purple things you see in these diagrams are actually radioactive material, and you can see some of the radioactive material actually degrades to a stable daughter. They're called the radioactive parent. These are the stable daughters, and you can see that this period of time down to 75%, 2 of them disappear. And then you go down a little bit more and we get another 2 disappearing. They actually disappear at a very normal rate. And basically what radiometric dating does is it dates rock using a percentage of the remaining radioactive material. If I know half of the material which used to be there is there now, I know that it's actually gone for 1 half-life. And this half-life can depend on some of the radioactive material they use for actually looking inside of human bodies to find problems. Have half-lives of seconds or minutes. Some things have half-lives of 4.5 billion years, the age of the Earth. So depending on what we want to use, depending on how far we want to go, we actually use different radioactive materials. Radioactive material works by changing. It's like flipping. It assumes rock decays at a certain time. It's like flipping coins and getting heads and tails. Let's say heads are the radioactive ones, so they stay as this uranium down here. I was going to say plutonium, but I think those are used. Uranium. And then if you flip them, there's a chance that half of the material is going to, I don't know why it does that. Half that material is going to actually change. So half of them could land for tails. It probably isn't going to work at a perfect 50-50. But if you actually had one group flipping coins, and you had another group in your class flipping coins, and another group flipping coins, and another group flipping coins, and another group flipping coins, and you had like 18 different groups in your class, so let's say 15 in your class flipping coins, and then you had 5 classes like I do, and you put all those together, and then you have 4 other biology teachers, and you do it with 4 other earth science teachers, and even chemistry teachers, you will work out to a 50-50%. So one particular sample may not work that way, but if you look at enough samples, they do. If you do it with organic material, if you're lucky enough to find a campfire that actually has some of the wood or has some of the bone material in there, you can actually you can use carbon-14 dating, which is also called carbon dating, but it's just a different form of radioactive dating. It just specifically says it's with carbon. And the way that works is we get cosmic rays hitting the nitrogen, which is in the air, makes up 78% of the air that you're breathing, and it actually knocks out a particle, creating carbon-14, which is a radioactive form of carbon, which sits in our atmosphere, and it's actually breathed in by plants and animals, and that is true. Plants do breathe in, and hopefully my kids know this. So we actually get them breathed in by animals, and then what happens is when the animal dies or the plant dies, the carbon starts changing back to nitrogen, and when 50% is gone, we know that thing has been dead for 5,730 years, plus or minus a few. And if it's down to 25%, we know it's been gone for almost 11,500 years. And if it goes down to 25%, it's a little more than 17,000 years. So now we can start putting ages to the relative dates, and we can start saying that, especially with volcanic material, which always comes out radioactive, very small radioactive material, but we can actually see it. So we can start assigning dates to certain rock layers and the fossils that are inside the rock. Here's a picture of the Cratons. These are the oldest sections of the land masses. They're the parts that you see way back in like the Permian or before. All this other stuff is relatively new rock as North America has been moving across the Pacific Ocean. We've picked up an accretion disk of, actually if I show you this picture, an accretion belt of volcanoes, volcanic islands, other land masses. So all this area was picked up sort of like a car going down the road and picking up insects, except it's picked up insects for the last 200 million years and picked up a lot of material. This is the oldest area of the North American area. Now it's called the Craton. So we had the shields up here. Now they're called Cratons. And that's the end of this section. So I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. And I hope this worked. I'll see you here in a second. Thank you much for stopping by. Bye.